Okay, so picture this. It's 1827. We're in a cramped little two-room apartment in a pretty grim part of London,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a man lying there, dying. And for all intents and purposes, in the eyes of the world, he's a failure.
A complete failure. He's lived in poverty his whole adult life.
He's about to be buried in a common grave in Bunhill Fields, which is, basically a pauper's pit.
And the very few people who even know his name, they mostly agree on one thing.
That the man was completely, utterly out of his mind.
Exactly. It is such a bleak starting point. I mean, if you were a betting person back in 1827, looking at the cultural landscape of England, you would have bet everything against William Blake being remembered at all.
Let alone revered.
Let alone revered, yes.
And yet, that's exactly why we're here today. This is the whole paradox of William Blake.
Yes, it is.
Because today, you walk into any university literature department, any art history lecture, and Blake is a titan. He's on the syllabus right next to Wordsworth and Keats.
He's in the lyrics of Bob Dylan. He's the spiritual godfather of the graphic novel.
His verses are sung in cathedrals. It's an unbelievable turnaround.
It's arguably the most dramatic rehabilitation of a reputation in English cultural history. You've got this figure who was, well, he was essentially invisible to the cultural elite of his own time.
Or laughingstock.
Or treated as a laughingstock, right. And yet he created a mythology so vast and a visual language so distinct that it took the rest of the world nearly a century to even figure out what he was doing.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the life and the work of William Blake. We've got a huge stack of sources here, biographies, art analysis, his own letters, even court records.
Right.
We really want to understand the idiosyncratic views that made him an outcast in his time, but, a visionary for ours.
And we have to get technical, too. We need to explore his unique artistic method, because the sources are really clear that his physical process of printing was just as revolutionary as his poetry. Absolutely. You just can't separate Blake the printer from Blake the poet. But before we even get to the mechanics of that, we have to address the elephant in the room.
The madness.
The madness, yeah.
Yeah.
We need to investigate whether he was actually, hallucinating, or if he just possessed a fundamentally different way of seeing.
I remember reading a claim by the critic Northrop Frye, and it was just staggering. He said, Blake's prophetic works are the least read body of poetry in the English language in proportion to their merit.
Wow. That's a huge claim.
Isn't it? It implies there's this massive treasure trove of insight that people just skip over because it's too weird or too dense.
And that's the challenge, right? Blake demands a suspension of modern cynicism. He asks you to look at the world through a lens where the spiritual is actually more real than the physical.
So let's start at the beginning. The child visionary. Usually when we talk about tortured artists, the trauma starts early. But with Blake, the sources say his childhood was just defined by these intense visual experiences.
Right. And visions is the key word here. We're not talking about a vivid imagination, the way a child imagines a dragon while playing.
Right.
For Blake, these experiences were visceral. They were external. He saw them with his physical eyes.
The biographical records point to one specific incident when he was just 4 years old. He starts screaming his head off because he claims he saw God put his head to the window.
Which is, if you really think about it, that's a terrifying image. A giant face just appearing at the window.
It really is. It speaks to the intensity of his perception, even as a toddler.
And it didn't stop there.
No. A bit later, he's maybe 8 or 10, walking through Peckham Rye, just a green space in London, and he looks up at a tree.
But he doesn't see leaves.
No. He tells his parents he saw a tree filled with angels, bespangling every bough like stars.
That phrase alone, bespangling every bough. It's so quintessentially Blake. It's poetic, even in just the recounting of the memory.
But the fascinating part for me is how the adults reacted. When he came home and told his father about the angel tree, his dad's immediate instinct was to thrash him.
Right. To beat the boy for telling lies.
Which, to be fair to his father, was pretty standard 18th century parenting.
Oh, absolutely. But it sets up this conflict immediately, doesn't it, between social reality and Blake's reality?
It does. But his mother stepped in. And the record suggests that while his father was strict, the parents were, on the whole, pretty supportive of his artistic side.
They made a crucial decision. They didn't force him into a standard school. He left school at age 10 and was educated at home by his mother.
Why was that so significant?
Well, because the English school system in the 1700s was a machine for conformity. It was all rote learning, drilling Latin, and often just brutal discipline.
Right.
Blake missed all of that. His mind wasn't hammered into the standard shape of the Georgian era. He was allowed to follow his own curriculum, reading widely and, well, wildly.
So he's allowed to be weird, but he still needs to make a living. He wasn't a rich kid. His dad was a hosier, selling socks and stockings. So at age 14, they have to decide his future.
They knew he had artistic talent, so they look into an apprenticeship. Ideally, he would have been apprenticed to a painter.
Ah, but the fees for a top-tier painter must have been
Astronomical. His father just couldn't afford it, so they settled on the next best thing. Engraving.
I want to pause on engraving because to a modern listener, that might just sound like art. But in the 18th century, there was a huge class distinction here, wasn't there?
Huge. A painter was a gentleman, an artist with a capital A who dealt with grand ideas. An engraver was a tradesman.
A craftsman.
A craftsman, yes. It was a service industry. Your job was to take a painting done by someone else and copy it onto a copper plate using a sharp steel tool called a burin.
Which sounds like grueling work.
It's grueling physical labor. You're cutting lines into metal day in, day out. It requires immense strength and precision, but very little creativity in the eyes of the art establishment.
But his master, a man named James Bazire, does something interesting. He sends young Blake to Westminster Abbey to draw.
And this is such a key moment. You have to strip away your modern image of Westminster Abbey. Today, it's clean, it's gray stone, it's full of tourists.
Right.
In the 1770s, it was a Gothic theater of memory. It was crowded with painted effigies, colorful waxwork, suits of armor, deep shadows. It wasn't a great tomb. It was vibrant and alive.
And Blake just falls in love with it.
He becomes obsessed. This is where he solidifies his love for the Gothic style. Now, you have to understand, in the 18th century, Gothic was a slur.
It meant barbarous.
It meant barbarous, rude, medieval. The sophisticated taste was classical, clean lines, Greek columns, symmetry. But Blake looked at the Gothic statues in the Abbey and saw what he called living form. He felt it was spiritual and true compared to the cold mathematics of the popular style.
There's a story from this time that I just love because it shows he wasn't just this, fragile visionary flower. The schoolboy incident.
Ah, yes. The Westminster schoolboys. They were notoriously entitled and used to run wild in the Abbey, and they started tormenting Blake while he was up on a scaffold sketching a tomb.
And Blake, the future mystic poet, doesn't just sit there and take it.
No, he knocks the boy right off the scaffold, and it worked. He complained to the dean, and the dean actually revoked the schoolboy's privileges to enter the Abbey.
It shows that even as a teenager, he had this spine of steel, a scrappy, combative nature that would really define his entire career.
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly to the next phase, rebellion. In 1779, he becomes a student at the Royal Academy of Arts. This is the inner sanctum of the British art world.
And the man running the show is Sir Joshua Reynolds?
Reynolds is, well, he's essentially the villain of Blake's early life. Reynolds was a brilliant society painter, but ideologically, he was the establishment personified. He championed this theory of art based on general truth and general beauty.
Okay, what does that actually mean, general beauty?
It means that to create high art, you shouldn't paint the specific quirks or, the flaws of model. You should smooth them out. You generalize nature to find the ideal form. Reynolds believed that the specific details, the mole on a cheek, a crooked nose, were distractions from the general truth.
And Blake
hated it with a burning passion. He actually wrote in the margins of his copy of Reynolds' discourses, and this is one of his most famous quotes, "To generalize is to be an idiot. To particularize is the alone distinction of merit."
To generalize is to be an idiot. I mean, that is such a direct attack on the head of the entire institution.
It's a total philosophical opposition. Blake believed that truth wasn't in the blurry average ideal. Truth was in the specific, the minute, the lineaments, as he called them.
Right.
He despised the oil painting style of masters like Rubens, which he found messy and blotted. He wanted the hard, clear, bounding lines of Michelangelo and Raphael.
Why? What was it about those hard lines?
Because when Blake saw a vision, it wasn't blurry. It was hyper-real. It was precise. It had a clear outline. He wanted his art to reflect that visionary clarity.
So you have this guy who sees angels and trees and wants art to be razor sharp, and he's stuck in a school that's telling him to blur the lines and paint general beauty.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Or a recipe for revolution. And speaking of revolution, we have to talk about the Gordon riots of 1780.
Yes, this is one of those historical moments that just feels like fiction. The Gordon riots were these massive anti-Catholic uprisings in London, Mobs, burning buildings, just total chaos.
And somehow Blake gets involved in this.
His biographer, Alexander Gilchrist, records that Blake was walking toward his old master's shop and basically got swept up by the mob. The sheer physical force of the crowd just carried him along.
Where were they going?
They stormed Newgate Prison, set it on fire, and released the prisoners. And Blake was reportedly in the front rank.
The front rank. So do we think he was there voluntarily? Or was he just like crowd surfing against his will?
It's ambiguous. I mean, he likely didn't plan to storm a prison when he woke up that morning, but Blake definitely had a radical streak.
I can imagine.
Seeing that kind of chaotic energy, the burning of a fortress of authority, that imagery absolutely seeped into his later work. He creates characters like Orc, the spirit of rebellion. You have to wonder if he was remembering the heat of the flames at Newgate.
It's that collision of the mystical and the really gritty reality of London that makes him so interesting. But let's shift gears a little to his personal life. We painted him as a bit of a loner, but he had a very, very significant partnership with his wife, Catherine Boucher.
This is one of the great partnerships in art history, truly. The courtship story itself is famous. Blake had just been rejected by another woman. He's at Catherine's house, complaining about his broken heart to her and her parents.
Right.
And he turns to Catherine and asks, "Do you pity me?" She says yes. And he just replies, "Then I love you."
That sounds incredibly sudden.
It was. They were married in 1782. And we have to look at the class dynamic here again. Catherine was the daughter of a market gardener, and she was illiterate when they met. She actually signed the marriage register with an X.
But she didn't stay illiterate.
No, not at all. Blake taught her to read and write, but more importantly for our discussion, he taught her how to print. We really have to correct the record on this. Catherine wasn't just a muse, she was a technician.
What was she doing in the workshop?
She operated the heavy rolling press, she mixed the paints, she hand-colored the printed pages.
So when we look at a Blake book, we're literally looking at her work too.
Absolutely. Scholars like Angus Whitehead have really emphasized that this was a collaborative workshop. Without Catherine's physical labor, the illuminated books, as we know them, probably wouldn't even exist.
There are some difficult parts of their history, though. Biographers mention stormy times. And there's this persistent rumor that Blake wanted to bring a concubine into the marriage.
This is a very controversial point. Blake was exploring radical religious ideas, specifically the writings of Swedenborg, which had some unconventional views on marriage and the spirit.
Okay.
And there is a story that Blake proposed bringing in a second wife, citing biblical patriarchs like Abraham as a precedent.
I can't imagine Catherine loved that idea.
The story goes that she cried and he dropped the idea immediately. But I should caution that a lot of modern scholars think this might be a misinterpretation of his poetry or just later gossip.
So we don't know for sure.
We don't. He wrote a lot about free love and the evils of jealousy, but whether he actually tried to practice polygamy is very debatable. What isn't debatable is the tragedy that they did share.
The loss of a child.
Yes. There's no official birth record, but biographers strongly suspect that Catherine had a stillborn daughter.
Wow.
And Blake's poem, The Book of Thel, is about an unborn spirit who's afraid to enter the world of experience and flees back to the eternal. It's very hard to read that poem and not see it as an elegy for a lost child.
That adds such a layer of sadness to his work. But let's move to the work itself. We keep saying illuminated books. For a listener who has never seen one, what are we actually talking about? Because he didn't just write a poem and send it off to a typesetter.
No, and this is the deep dive into the technology. In the 18th century, if you wanted to publish a book with pictures, it was a two-step process.
Right.
First, you'd set the text in lead, type letter by letter, and print that. Then you'd take a copper plate, engrave the picture, and print that separately on another page.
Which was expensive, and it separated the word from the image.
Exactly. Blake wanted them to be one organic thing. He wanted total control. So around 1788, he invented relief etching. It's brilliant in its simplicity, but just incredibly difficult to execute.
Okay, so how does it work?
It's the reverse of standard engraving. In standard engraving, you cut the lines into the copper. Blake did the opposite. He used an acid-resistant liquid, kind of stop-out varnish.
And he'd point with that.
He'd use a brush to paint his text and his images directly onto the copper plate.
But he would have had to write the text backwards, right? In mirror writing.
Yes. Can you imagine? He had to write his poetry in reverse, with a brush, in varnish, on a copper plate. The skill required is just mind-boggling.
So then what?
Then he'd dip the plate in acid. The acid would eat away all the raw, untouched copper, but it couldn't touch the parts he had painted with the varnish.
So when he washed the acid off, the text and the image were left standing up.
Standing up in relief, exactly, like a rubber stamp.
So he could ink the whole plate and print the words and the picture in one go.
Exactly. This was revolutionary. It meant he could be his own publisher, his own printer, his own distributor. He bypassed the censors, the commercial publishers, the editors. He completely seized the means of production.
It's like the 18th century equivalent of starting a Substack or a YouTube channel because the mainstream networks won't hire you.
That is a perfect analogy. He became an independent media house of one. And after printing, he and Catherine would hand-paint each page with watercolors.
Which means every copy is unique.
Every single copy of Songs of Innocence or The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is a unique work of art. They're not mass-produced commodities.
So he's working away in London, creating these masterpieces, but he's still really struggling financially.
Yep.
And then, in 1800, he decides to leave London. He moves to the countryside, to a village called Felpham.
This was supposed to be the big turning point. A patron, a man named William Haley, invited him to live in a cottage and work as his personal illustrator.
And at first, Blake is thrilled.
He's ecstatic. He writes letters saying, heaven opens here on all sides. He's seeing angels in his garden. He feels free from the city.
But the reality sets in pretty quickly.
William Haley was. While Blake later called him a corporeal friend and a spiritual enemy.
Ouch.
Haley was a bad poet and, by all accounts, a bit of a bore. He didn't understand Blake's genius at all. He just wanted Blake to do drudgery, painting miniatures, decorating ladies' fans.
He tried to turn the visionary prophet into a commercial decorator.
Precisely. And Blake felt his soul was just being suffocated by it all.
And then comes the incident with the soldier. This is the moment where Blake's life really hangs in the balance.
The John Schofield incident. It's August 1803. Blake finds a soldier, John Schofield, wandering around in his garden. Blake asks him to leave.
And Schofield refuses.
Schofield refuses. So Blake, again showing that scrappy nature, grabs the soldier by the elbows and physically marches him down the road to the local inn.
But Schofield doesn't just, walk away and forget about it.
No. Schofield goes to the magistrate and swears an oath that Blake committed sedition. He claims that during the scuffle, Blake shouted, "Damn the king, the soldiers are all slaves."
And we have to contextualize this. In 1803, England is terrified of a French invasion. Napoleon is at the door.
Exactly.
Accusing someone of sedition is not a small thing.
It was a hanging offense. Blake was put on trial at the Chichester Assizes for assault and sedition. If the jury had believed the soldier, Blake could have been in prison or, well, much worse.
So what happened at the trial?
Blake was acquitted. The evidence was deemed to be invented. The villagers all testified to his good character. But the psychological scar was deep.
I'm sure.
Blake felt he had been targeted by the state, and he immortalized it in his art. In his later epic poem, Jerusalem, the character Schofield appears as a villain wearing mind-forged manacles. He literally turned his accuser into a demon in his personal mythology.
That brings us to the mythology itself.
Yes.
'Cause this is where a lot of listeners might get lost. You open a Blake book, and it's not just Jesus and Satan. It's Urizen, Los, Anatharman, Orc. Why did he need to create his own gods?
Because he felt the traditional religious terms were polluted. God and angel had been used by the state and the church to justify war, slavery, and repression. So he created his own pantheon, the four Zoas, to map the human psyche.
Okay, let's break them down. Who are the key players in this system?
Okay, so the big one is Urizen. His name sounds like horizon, the limit, or your reason. He is the embodiment of reason and law. He's usually depicted as an old man with a white beard holding a compass, measuring the world, creating rules.
So reason is the bad guy. I mean, that's a pretty bold take for the Age of Enlightenment.
In Blake's world, yes. Single vision, pure rationality without emotion or imagination is destructive. It freezes the world into a dead thing.
So who's the hero?
The hero is Los, L-O-S. He represents imagination and poetry. He's a blacksmith, constantly beating form out of the fires of chaos. He is the active, creative force.
And Anatharman.
She represents inspiration and pity, the female counterpart or emanation of Los. And then you have Orc, the fiery spirit of rebellion. Orc is the energy that explodes against Urizen's cold laws.
This all connects to his most famous work, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. He basically flips the entire Bible on its head.
It does. He argues that in traditional religion, good is just passive obedience, which the church calls heaven, and evil is active energy and desire, which they call hell.
And Blake says,
Blake says, energy is eternal delight. He argues that the creative force, the devil party, is actually the source of all life and genius.
The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction.
Precisely. The untamed, instinctive energy of the tiger has more divine wisdom than the trained, obedient horse.
And this wasn't just abstract theology for him, it was deeply political.
Extremely political. Blake was a radical through and through. He wore the Phrygian cap, the red cap of the French Revolution in the streets of London, which was a dangerous statement to make.
And he was fiercely anti-slavery.
Fiercely. His poems, like The Little Black Boy and Visions of the Daughters of Albion, attacked the institution of slavery and the commodification of human beings with a ferocity that was really rare for his time.
And his views on free love fit in here, too.
Yes. He saw a marriage that lacked love as just legal prostitution. He believed that suppressing your natural desires twisted the soul. He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence.
That's a powerful line.
It is. However, we should add some nuance here. As he got older, his views shifted a bit. He moved away from a purely libertine idea of do whatever you want toward a philosophy of self-denial. But, and this is key, self-denial inspired by love for another person, not by a commandment from a priest or a king.
Okay, so we have to circle back to the madness question again in this context. Because while he's writing these incredible epics, he's telling people he's, having lunch with the prophet Isaiah.
Wordsworth, the other great poet of the age, had a really famous quote about this. He said, "There is something in the madness of this man which interests me more than the sanity of Lord Byron and Walter Scott."
That's a great line. It's like, he's crazy, but he's interesting crazy.
And Blake certainly didn't help his own case with anecdotes like the ghost of a flea.
Oh, you have to tell that story.
So he was with an astrologer friend named John Varley, and Blake suddenly says, "I see the ghost of a flea." Varley, who is fascinated by the occult, gets very excited and says, "Draw it!" And Blake stares into what, for anyone else, is an empty corner of the room and draws this terrifying, muscular, scaly man monster holding a little cup for blood.
Wow.
And he claimed the spirit told him that fleas were inhabited by the souls of men who were by nature bloodthirsty to excess.
I mean, that sounds exactly like a hallucination.
It does, but then you look at the drawing. It's incredibly specific, it's technical. To Blake, the imagination was the body of God. If he imagined it, it was real. He just didn't distinguish between inner and outer reality the way that we do.
So let's fast forward to the end of his life. He's in his 60s, he's back in London, he's poor, he's obscure. But then something amazing happens. He gets discovered by a new generation.
The Ancients. This is the real redemption arc of his story. A group of young artists, including Samuel Palmer and John Linnell, they found Blake's work.
And it didn't see a madman.
They saw a sage. They called him the interpreter. They valued his spiritual intensity over the materialism of the dawning industrial world.
And practically speaking, they saved him from utter poverty.
They did. John Linnell commissioned him to illustrate the Book of Job and Dante's Divine Comedy. This gave Blake a steady income and a real purpose in his final years. And the work he produced for the Book of Job is considered by many to be his absolute masterpiece of engraving.
And he worked right up until the very end, didn't he? The death of William Blake in 1827 is one of the most moving scenes in all of literary biography.
It really is. He's lying in his bed, working on the Dante illustrations. He stops, looks over at Catherine, who has been by his side for 45 years, and says, "Stay, Kate. Keep just as you are. I will draw your portrait, for you have ever been an angel to me."
Oh, that is just heartbreakingly beautiful.
And then after he finishes the sketch, he lays down his tools and just starts singing loudly. He's singing hymns about the things he is seeing in the invisible world.
Incredible.
A lodger in the same house later said, "I have been at the death, not of a man, but of a blessed angel."
But the story has a tragic postscript. After Blake dies, and then after Catherine dies, what happens to all his leftover work?
Well, Catherine lived for a few more years. She actually continued to sell his works, but she would always consult Mr. Blake's spirit before setting a price.
Of course she would.
But after she died, the remaining manuscripts passed to a man named Frederick Tatham.
And Tatham was not exactly a fan of Blake's more radical stuff.
Not at all. Tatham had converted to a very fundamentalist sect called the Irvinites. He came to believe that Blake's work was heretical and inspired by the devil, so he burned it.
He burned the manuscripts.
We don't know exactly how much was lost forever, but Blake had once told a friend he had written 20 tragedies as long as Macbeth. None of them survive.
That is a cultural crime. 20 Macbeths gone forever because one guy got squeamish.
It is absolutely devastating, but enough survived to ignite the future.
So let's talk about that legacy. Because he does eventually rise from the ashes.
It started slowly with the pre-Raphaelites in the mid-19th century, artists like Rossetti and Swinburne who just loved his medieval aesthetic. But the real explosion, that happened in the 20th century.
A counterculture.
Exactly. The Beats. Allen Ginsberg claimed he literally heard Blake's voice reciting poetry to him in his apartment. And think about the band The Doors.
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison named the band after a line from Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite.
And I think most people probably assume that's an Aldous Huxley quote.
Huxley used it for his book title, but he got it directly from Blake. Blake is the godfather of that whole psychedelic idea that reality is so much bigger than what our five senses report to us.
And in literature, you've got Philip Pullman. His Dark Materials series is basically a modern retelling of Blake's war against authoritarian religion.
And yet, there's a supreme irony in all this. Blake's poem from the preface to Milton, the one that starts, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green?"
It became the hymn Jerusalem.
Yes, it's sung at cricket matches, rugby games, the last night of the proms. It's become an unofficial English national anthem.
Which is so ironic, because the poem is a radical attack on the dark satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution and the authority of the church.
It's a call for a mental revolution to build a new Jerusalem. Blake would probably find it hilarious or horrifying that the very establishment he hated is now singing his song while waving flags.
There's one last detail about his legacy that I found really touching. His grave.
For a very long time, the exact spot in Bunhill Fields was lost. There was a general memorial stone, but it wasn't on the grave itself.
Right.
But in 2018, after 14 years of painstaking investigation by a Portuguese couple, Carol and Luis Garrido, the exact spot was rediscovered.
And they finally put a proper marker on it.
They did. It reads, "Here lies William Blake, 1757-1827, poet, artist, prophet."
Better late than never.
Indeed.
So, let's wrap this all up. What's the final takeaway here? We've talked about the printer, the madman, the prophet. Why does he still matter so much to the listener today?
I think it all comes back to his hatred of single vision, of Newton's scientific materialism. Blake isn't saying science is bad, but he's saying it's incomplete. He believed that imagination was the body of God.
The human ability to create, to visualize, that's the fundamental reality for him.
Exactly. He lived in poverty and obscurity because he refused to compromise that vision. He refused to generalize or to fit into the box that Joshua Reynolds wanted him to fit into.
He really challenges us. We live in an era of algorithms, big data, and consensus reality. We're constantly being told what to like, what to think, how to measure our own worth.
And Blake says, look deeper.
He leaves us with that provocative thought. The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction.
So the question for you, for the listener, is this. In your own life, are you being the horse of instruction, doing what you're told, following the safe, well-trodden path?
Or are you suppressing a tiger? What would happen if, just for a day, you trusted your own visions, your own idiosyncratic way of seeing the world over the consensus of everyone else? You might just create something eternal.
It's a dangerous thought, but a necessary one.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep your eyes open for the angels in the trees.
Goodbye.